Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by yet again. I had quite a bit to share with you because I'm going to be making a general forecast for this decade. I haven't done that before here. It's the sort of stuff I've been doing all my life, 45, 50, oh good grief, no. It will be 55 years pretty soon. And it's just something that comes to me. I mean, I've done it so often in so many different countries and so many parts of the world that I'm perfectly comfortable with it, but I normally don't share it because people get upset one way or the other, or they have opinions that differ, they get very emotional and so on. And I can't be that way. I have to be an analyst. An analyst cannot be emotional about the analysis. Afterwards, if you don't like it, you can be emotional. But the point is that when you analyze, you must not allow your emotions to enter into it. And that's all there is to it. If you do, you're going to distort it. So after having done that many, many, many times, it was natural that I would do that when I came here. And I did purposefully, of course, because I wanted to know if this is the place I wanted to live. And it was. I determined that then. That was February 2004. And I feel exactly the same way today that I did back then. Certainly no regrets. Now, I'm not going to go through everything that went on during that period, but I'm going to say that I was looking at, among other things, what Panama did with its great gift, which is the Panama Canal. And what they've done with it is phenomenal. I'm not talking just about the canal. You have to understand the economy as a whole. Many countries I've seen that have gotten gifts like that, so to speak, from history, and they leave it. If they take good care of it, it can be useful. But if all Panama had done is maintain the canal that had been built in 1904 to 1914 and kept it rolling, it would be useful today, but they would be in serious financial trouble. And because they would not be a successful country. They would have a lot of financial problems. Hard though it may be to believe. But they didn't do that. What they have done is, in fact, very little was done throughout the 20th century. And without the money coming in from the canal and not available to them, and there's no control over that, and a large segment of their territory not being under their direct control, but the country basically being divided by a foreign power with its military bases. I mean, there was reason for it. Everybody knows there's no use getting upset about it. It was a reality. That came to an end. And starting in 2000, this nation really started to grow. And I knew that. I knew when I arrived, I didn't care about the emotions involved. Look, I had gone through and watched Eastern Europe come out of its particular situation, and that was far more severe than anything Panama had had to face. So I've seen a lot of this go on and the question was, where are they going to go with this? And it looked like they were doing their best. And they have continued to do so. They've done a really phenomenal job of expanding the economy. So people come down thinking the canal represents 50, 60% of the economy. It represents 15 to 17%. It just depends on how you want to figure it. But it's expanded, and they've taken it and they've just run with it. It's most impressive. And people here are almost entirely ignorant of it because the reports are out there. It's public knowledge. People don't bother with that, okay? Now, I'm going to just sort of jump in and say my great concern was how would they deal with threats and problems and challenges. And 2004, the Americans began to build up their big, huge housing bubble, having just blown up their stock market a couple years earlier. And it, as we all know, came crashing down. By 2008, it became very evident. And we moved on to the next stage into a global financial crisis, referred to sometimes as the Great Recession. In 2009, March 2009 was a particularly bad month, I remember. Long story, but I had been doing work with opinion surveys in the United States on people's attitudes toward moving overseas and what have you as a result of living down here. And we did a lot of work in that. I've been interviewed all over the place in those surveys. We saw this dramatic increase in interest in 2009. So a lot was happening at that stage. This is from the American viewpoint. But from the global viewpoint as a whole, things were rapidly changing. Panama came through it fine. it actually grew in 2009, where most nations, including the U.S. and Canada, both of them actually fell backwards, as it was true all around the world. But Panama continued to grow. And the housing market here did not crash. In fact, it grew a little bit stronger in the metropolitan area. It did get hurt out in the far west, where depend on retirees often from the north. They're a major portion of the market out there for expatriate level housing. So as a result, that was difficult. They went through a very tough patch. But at the urban area, because this is people from all over the world coming in, we had an increase in numbers of people coming at that time, that we had a decrease coming in to buy homes from the U.S. And it really made a difference. So they came through that period extremely well. Since that particular moment in time, of course, we've had other challenges. We had the Panama Papers. It was like a bump in the road. It made a lot of noise, but it wasn't Panamanians who were making big bucks, except for our law firm. It were for foreigners, people like yourselves from your own nations who were responsible. And they were the ones who made the decisions that made it useful. But we got stuck with the reputation. I wrote the defense of Panama for the Barron's, which is a financial publication in the U.S., and submitted it, and they published it, and I was very pleased I was able to speak out on behalf of the country. But the truth of the matter is it didn't have any major impact at all. People knew Panama a lot better than most people. Those who actually, I got more positive emails from that than the other half dozen times I'd written for Barron's, and many other topics considered even more exciting than Panama Papers. Got a lot of emails, and every one of them was positive. People who knew Panama knew better. So we have done very well, and each time the country met that challenge and got past it. And we've just gone through this again with COVID. We closed down the economy. Now, think of it this way. In 2019, we got to the point where we had the highest level per capita of gross domestic product. Think of national income, the total national income of the country, divided by the population per person, was higher here than any other country in Latin America. We finally passed Chile, who was the last one. And 2020, bam, we get hit by this. But we did is we really closed down the economy here, really rough, because we were determined to stop this. And we were playing games with it just to keep a statistic rolling. And unfortunately, Pfizer was in its, given the situation, then they were a little slow in getting the shots to us, the vaccinations, the vaccine. And so we were slow in getting off the ground with that, but not because of our fault. We'd already paid for these things. They just arrived later than expected. Long story short, they did a phenomenal job of distribution in the country. It's one of the best organized efforts I've seen anywhere. And this has led us today to a position where we're in much better shape. And we are still very conservative in our approach to this because we are determined not to let this get out of hand if we can possibly avoid it. And it's worked. So far, it's working. Knock on wood. We all know things can change. Omicron can turn into something. I don't know. I don't care. The point is that the country successfully dealt with challenge after challenge, and I've just barely touched on it. And they have not only come back from it, they usually came back stronger from it. And there's been a lot of very positive news that you don't hear about because it's there, but nobody bothers to talk about it. All right, now, what are we at today? I'm going to run through these things too because they're all important. It's the people who really move large sums of money, who depend on Panama doing well to pay off loans, for example, or to provide the services that are needed and so forth, that expect us to be run in a responsible business-like manner. They look at all countries that way. What do they think of Panama? How do you measure that? And you measure it by their own attitude. They express themselves. Most of the time, international groups, people that deal with globally, with countries all over the world, all over Latin America, for example, will not single out a single country and say this is a really critical country, then so on and so on, especially if it's small. If you're Brazil or you're Mexico, you're big. You have 50 times the population of Panama in Brazil, 30 times that in Mexico. They are much better known, and people think of them as being economically more powerful, but they're not in terms of actual income per person. We way out in front of both of those nations. So, but we're small. So when you're small, you tend to get ignored, but not by people who move money. And I'd say 5-10 years ago, what I'm going to talk to you about would not have happened. But it's happening now because of all of this, and particularly the last few years. This is why in my last report, if you read it, you read Mauricio Claver-Corona, who is the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, his statement to the effect that if Panama succeeds the rest of the region, he means Latin America, well, too. We're key in his mind. That's a very unusual thing for a man who represents an international bank that covers the entire Western Hemisphere from the United States down to Argentina and Chile, to pick out one little tiny country, Panama, and make that sort of statement. But there's more than that. I mean, look at from the private sector's viewpoint. I'm not going to even begin to go into all the details here, but there's a lot of trouble in Latin America. They've had a terrible, terrible time, and COVID has really, really stressed out these countries, so many of them. It's hard to find a country in good shape right now. I know you may look at them and the ads on the internet, what have you. Yeah, they have beautiful beaches and beautiful mountains and terrible economies, and they have rioting in the streets, and they have all sorts of problems. And you don't even, as a rule, know about them because the sites you visit won't talk about them very much. But it's not there. The data is available. The information is everywhere. Business people who are in global business, in global investment, know. And that's the important thing, is they're the ones who move the money. So Bloomberg, for example, the Bloomberg organization, huge, then thousands and thousands of people working all over the world. They're a key element in the whole investment and financial communities, no question about it. Whether or not you like Michael Bloomberg is your problem, not mine, not anyone else's. He's done a wonderful job of building this spectacular business, and he takes it very seriously. But he has a great crew of people who actually run the business. They're very careful in what they do. Now, they've been, the latest thing, I mean, they're cutting edge effort at Bloomberg, and they always have a lot of things going on there, a lot, is called the New Economy platform. And they've just recently held meetings, just a month or so ago, in Singapore. The New Economy platform at Bloomberg has only been directed toward Asia here since its creation. And Michael Bloomberg came out at that particular conference just held and said, it's time for us to expand. The first region we're going to be going to is Latin America, and we're going to start in Panama. And we are the focal point for this. This is where the operation will be headed here. And the conference will be held probably in the early months of next year, assuming travel and, COVID allows us. It will be held here, this opening conference. I can't tell you how aggravating this must be to people in places like Brazil who would expect it to be there, or Colombia, or Chile, or any of a number of countries that are much larger than we are, who consider themselves to be substantially more important. They chose Panama, little dinky Panama, but there's good reason, because I haven't even really mentioned it, but there's so much that has gone on positively here. We've built up such a reputation for getting the job done and being secure. We are where we are now, but we didn't get here through rioting, as has been happening over the last couple of years. If you don't know these things, getting so deeply in debt we've fallen into speculative or junk bond status, which a lot of countries have. We're pushing it, but we've maintained our investment level, and that's good. We get very good interest rates for whenever we loan money. We have all sorts of reasons for being very pleased with the way in which the international community has dealt with us. We had a real plan from this administration to approach the United States, and with it the global markets, effectively at these last few months. I've watched it unfold, and I admire the hard work that went into it and the planning. Obviously, a great deal of planning went into it. And that's why Michael Bloomberg made the announcement he did. I'll give you, you can get the link in the description below, and you can read the press release about that. But, one conference, what's the big deal? The big deal is that people representing huge amounts of jobs and money will be meeting here to talk about the new economy and initiating activities and work in Latin America from Panama. That's huge, and it is noticed by people in the community. So you may not be terribly impressed by it. They are. They get the message clear. So that's cool. And then beyond that, though, there are even more important things. The International Monetary Fund is known for having to deal with countries in desperate shape. They run out of money. They're the lender of last resort. People come to them for loans because they just can't afford to go to the private market. They're charging too much interest. And that's all very common all around Latin America. It's unfortunate, and you wish them all well. We're not in that position. So the IMF is very well aware of us, and they come every year, as they do every country in Latin America, and they give us their opinions and so forth, what have you. When it came time at the early part of this year to make a forecast of what the growth in our national income, our GDP, would be for this year, after an 18% drop last year, the government here was using 4 to 5%. And local economists who make these sorts of estimates, where the optimistic ones might run up to, say, 6 or 7%, maybe, pushing it, a little bit, and being positive. And then out comes the economist and their group in London with 8%. Oh, well, that's pretty good. Then the World Bank comes out with a classic bank, 9.9%. They can't quite bring themselves to go double digit, so they go 1/10 below that. But that is astonishing. I mean, we're extremely pleased to do that. And then out comes the International Monetary Fund, who tends to be very critical of Latin American countries, and they say 12%. What? 12%? It was almost impossible to find anybody anywhere in this country who could really accept that. I sat there and said, well, I'm going to be happy if we get up to 8 or 10. 10 would be fantastic. But 12, I mean, that's, wow, that's a big reach. And so far we're on schedule to do just exactly that. And we did 10% back at the end of October. So we'll see. We won't know the final figures until earlier next year, because obviously we have to get through the end of this year first. Then we have to do all the work that's involved in putting these things together. Terrific amount of information has to be put together. Now, but the point is this institution looks like it did a darn good job of figuring out what was happening here and where it was headed. I mention that because they have put out a report. And you will find links to it. If you read nothing else, read this, okay? It's in the description below. Its title is The Different Shades of Latin America's Economic Convergence. We'll go back to that in a minute here. It's in English, in Spanish, and Portuguese, so I put it in two. So you have links to all three varieties. To say that it's an unusual article is an understatement. And what they're talking, it's quite surprising, but what they're talking about, different nations in Latin America are in completely different positions vis-a-vis convergence. And convergence here is reaching the same level of affluence as in the United States of America. That's the mark. That's the, if the U.S. continues to grow at this particular level in Panama, how long does it take, or Brazil or Mexico, how long will it take them to come up and meet the same level as the United States? That's convergence. It's us. And it comes always as a big surprise to people when they read stuff like that. They have made Panama their go-to example of how things should be done. what this article says basically, and it's, as I say, it's incredibly unusual, is they don't have any other examples to show, and they're showing, guys, to the rest of the region, this is how it's done. And do it. If you do it this way, you can do it too. So take a look at it, and you will find a lot of interesting information in there. You'll find a chart that's really very fascinating. These are from the people who got it right from our growth rate. Whether they're right in this case, I don't know. And they're talking about even further in the future than 2030. I don't ever go that far. But the key point is this, that this is just tip of the, we have all these other things that are going on too. I mean, we've got our new convention center is finally open. We already had a few small conferences there. We have bigger ones coming, including the Bloomberg one, but now others as well. I think 17 are so far listed for next this coming year. Not all of them at the new convention center, but most of the big ones will be there. They can handle up to 22,000 people. It's quite a sight. If I think about it, I'll stick a little TikTok video in of showing it. It's amusing because they have a conference on now, or did a few days ago, which is regular here, and in the old convention center would pack it, just absolutely fill it up. So, and in this case, they take it to the main exhibition hall at the new center, and it's like off in one corner. It seems so small. It's very amusing. But it's going, it's operating. We're very pleased with that. And we're building a new addition to our Cinta Costera, which is that road that runs along the bay that people talk about. Some of you will know from visiting. This is an additional access road to get people to the convention center, which we needed. So I'm glad it's getting done. And also takes into account that we've opened the new cruise ship port right over in that same area. And our first cruise ships arrived in the last couple weeks, and that's worked out very nicely. Before, they've only been able to get off on the other side, on the Caribbean side. Now they can do it here, and they can actually home port here if they want to. So, and they'll start their work, trips from here too. Not out of the question. Our new airport is operational. I don't know if, I haven't been able to go out and take a look and see if all the little bits and pieces are together for being pretty, but the whole thing is functioning, and that's the important thing, because we were working hard to get that done. The COVID and the pandemic really caused problems in construction here around all over. But in terms of the convention center and the airport, they were two of the projects brought back on board fastest, and people worked under very strict conditions so that as not to make themselves sick or something of this sort. And it worked, and we needed to get these things done. So we've got that going. That's a big shift. Now that we have the new airport, it's potential to have direct flights from Asia. We already have an air services agreement with Singapore. It would be nice if circumstances allow, international travel rises again, to have a direct flight with Singapore Airlines and Copa, our airline, trading flights here. The work continues on our metro system, which expands and expands, and it's going to be expanding for some years to come, including the new spur that will go from the international airport to the line running into the city. And that should be done, I would say, fairly soon, and I hope early next year, so that we can begin to use that, and that's going to be very useful. Let's see, what else do we have? I'm looking over here. We're expanding the bus system. I mean, these are all these things that people don't even know about. We have a modern bus system that was introduced in the time I've been here. We have a big metro area. We have these big buses that roll around, air conditioned. They're all very nice, and they run, and they're very inexpensive. So working class people don't get hit hard by this. They depend on it. They needed it. The old bus system of privately run buses was a disaster, unfortunately, because they were very colorful and very interesting, but they had so many problems you wouldn't believe it. It was necessary, and it's been done. But our problem now is we have need for smaller buses, not quite so large, to bring in, like feeder buses, bring into the main routes people from neighborhoods that are a bit further out or don't require a large bus. So we're talking maybe 40, 50 people in a bus. That's a medium-sized bus. What about those? Well, we had a bus donated. I don't know, somebody gave it to us, I think, because they wanted to sell them. But anyhow, an electric bus. And we were to use for a year. It's been put through its test. They did the same thing up in Costa Rica, in San Jose. And both we and the Costa Ricans were very pleased with the results. They don't have any money at the moment, though, so they have to put this off. We ordered 195 of them. Wow. Okay, so theirs are being made, and they will start arriving, I assume, next year, and be folded into, they're not replacing, they're added to our ever-growing bus system. We're really getting this transportation thing down, and I'm very pleased to see that. And again, these are all things that may or may not get mentioned. Then there's a lot more I won't even cover with the logistics system over at the canal area, the liquefied natural gas depot, and everything. All this stuff, you just have to sit there and you take it for granted, so to speak. And then one of the more irritating things here is to hear people still pretend that there's a thing called the Nicaragua Canal under construction or likely to be. That is not the case at all. And what's annoying about that, particularly annoying, is that the Nicaraguan situation is such that it's almost impossible to see them building anything right at the moment. They're turning into a dictatorship. It's a worse situation than Venezuela. It's happening very quickly because nobody cares. It's too small and too unimportant a country, and nobody's doing anything substantial to turn it around. And we're all watching this, and this is not a happy day in Latin America and other nations. I mean, it's a terrible situation. But then we have some writer for a major newspaper in the other side, the European side of the big pond, who recently published an article about how the Chinese were really getting into Latin America, and his example was the Nicaraguan Canal. And he has this picture of Danny Ortega up there with this Chinese gentleman. And what is going on here? This is absurd. This has been dead for years. There's no truth to it at all. Well, he put the link in as the support for the story, and I went into it. And I realized what he had done. He's supposedly a Latin American specialist. He's really a specialist in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. He knows nothing about Nicaragua and Panama, that's clear. But he'd been writing about this topic, and he was looking for a photograph to use with the article. And he wanted to get it from this newspaper's photographs. Then you don't have to worry about copyrights and all this sort of stuff. And he found a perfect one. He was just, I am sure, delighted, because it was in October, this October, and the article had been published in October, and there was the photo, and it was exactly what he wanted to get across. And here I'm sitting a couple weeks later, a week or two later, and I'm looking at this, and I'm going, what is this going on? And the one thing he did right was to put a link in the article to his support for these statements about Nicaragua. So I clicked on the link. It was an article in that newspaper, which is why he didn't have any trouble getting copyright permission. And it also was published in October of 2014. Yeah, 7 years ago, this was a big issue. It is dead, and yet I still know there are websites out there who pretend that this is real. Right along with the Chinese are building a railroad to David. I mean, these things, no, they're not. This stuff just sort of hangs on, and then some guy like this does something stupid. I wrote him in LinkedIn, and I said, don't ever do that again. He's lucky I don't just get unpleasant about it, but let's just say that makes my life a little bit more difficult because people want to believe this. Instead, as I suggested to him, I gave him something. I'll give you the article. I think I can get there. It'll be in Spanish, but Google can translate it for you. It's the very first announcement in April of this year when the canal announced it was beginning the initial stages of the planning for the next expansion of the canal. We're going to do it again. All right? The first expansion is hugely successful and now provides the great majority of the money from the canal. I guess we're pushing up close to 2/3. The old canal still operates, but it can't handle these new ships. These new ships love our canal, and the demand is huge. And we're actually able, there are certain values to supply chains having problems, but we're raising our rates for going through, and we're seriously begin this stage. This would still mean a couple years before we would actually begin the construction of a new expansion. You have a lot of, probably 3. I mean, it depends. You have a lot of planning to do. But when they built the most recent one that was inaugurated in 2016, that's the second canal, I call it, and it is. And the third canal is coming down the board. When they built the second one, they had the heavy-duty equipment up there at the locks to prepare them for the new canal. And they also prepared additional land in the event they ever wanted to expand. Long story short, what would cost another country like Nicaragua or anybody $50, $60, $70 billion to build and take years and years and years to do it, and all sorts of problems associated, and then have to staff it, and forget it. We can do that in a matter of 2 years, 3 years, and for maybe $5, $6 billion, maybe less, $5 billion maybe. You can't, and we're likely to have it done. Nobody else is building. What it boils down to is that's baloney. So we've got that taken care of. So it's not like we've stopped. And then in addition, the Canal Authority is in the process now of awarding contracts. We have a $2 billion study. That's for the studies, for ways of providing additional water for drinking purposes and for use of the canal. Wow. I mean, there's so much of this going on. There's a lot of stuff on that, and the web is full of information on all of this stuff, and you won't read 98% of it in the so-called Panama websites that you go to, much less putting it together. So what I'm saying to you, in summary, what do I mean? This country is a good place to invest. It is now. It isn't going to get any cheaper than this in all likelihood, God forbid. I mean, we could have some more serious problems here, and another lockdown, who knows? And you knock on wood, you don't assume anything. That any analyst will tell you is a mistake. But as things go, we will get through this, and we're going to be in good shape, better shape than any others. We've gotten through all this so far without a single life being lost. Almost every capital has had people die. And billions of dollars of damage, and gosh, in Santiago, they not only burned police stations, burned metro stations, they burned down 2 churches. In Chile, come on, and etc. In Bogota, oh, what a mess. A couple dozen people killed in rioting. I mean, we've had so much trouble all over the area, and we stand out. And this, all I'm talking about today is that it's been noticed by people who move money, and they are committing to this country before this whole thing is over, because they have to take the long view. They have to get rolling. They can't wait for everybody else to agree that everything's fine now. And so they're doing it. And the IMF and other international agencies, I mean, they weren't the only one to be positive. All the others were. They all were more positive than we were about the country's future. And it's happening. So that's what I just want to say. It's a good place to invest, and I'm not going to talk any more about that, because we'll talk more in the next video, where I want to talk about how you approach things and looking at things from investment-wise. I know some of you want to start businesses, for example. I can't tell you what to do or where to do it or so on, but I can give you some general comments on how you go about approaching it and looking at it, and that will come next. Thank you for putting up for this exceptionally long one. Believe it or not, it is shorter than the one I had done earlier and had on 3 occasions, and finally I'm getting it finished today. Thank you for your patience. And don't forget to look down at the description, see some of the links down there, and subscribe if you haven't. Okay, let me click off.